In this video on inverse functions, I worked through the 4 examples we see here to show you how to find their inverse functions. And if ever you want to skip ahead to see how to find the inverse of any specific function you see here, I've added chapters or timestamps at the bottom of this video for you to skip ahead if needs be. And if not, let's get started. With this first example, we're given f of x which equals to 2x minus 8. And to find this function's inverse, we can follow 2 steps. The first step, step 1, is to start from y equals to 2x minus 8 and to rearrange this to make x the subject. And I do so by using inverse operations. So let's go ahead. I'll start by getting rid of this 8 that's being subtracted from the right-hand side, and I do that by adding 8 to both sides of this equation. That leads us to y plus 8 equals to 2x. Next, I get rid of this 2 that's multiplying the x, and I do so by dividing both sides by 2. Which leads us to y plus 8 over 2 equals to x, or x equals to y plus 8 over 2. And that's the first step done. We've now made x the subject. Step 2, I swap the x and the y in this boxed expression. That is, I rewrite this as y equals to x plus 8 over 2. Finally, using this result, I define the inverse function. And that would be inverse of f equals to x plus 8 over 2. And we're done. We found this function's inverse. I move on to the second example. We have f of x which equals to the square root of 3x plus 15. Well, again, I follow the same 2 steps. So that's step 1, I start with y equals to the square root of 3x plus 15, and I rearrange this to make x the subject. Now looking at this, x is stuck underneath this square root. So the first thing I do is I square both sides of this equation to get rid of it. So this becomes y squared equals to 3x plus 15. Now I get rid of this 15 that's being added to the right-hand side, and I do so by subtracting 15 from both sides. We therefore have y squared minus 15 equals to 3x. Now x is being multiplied by 3, so to get rid of this 3, I divide both sides by 3. I'll just write that here, I divide by 3. And that leads us to y squared minus 15 over 3 equals to x, which I'll rewrite from right to left as x equals to y squared minus 15 over 3. And that's the first step done. I move on to step 2, in which I swap the x and the y to write y equals to x squared minus 15 over 3, and finally I define the inverse function, inverse f of x equals to x squared minus 15 over 3. And we're done. I now look at the third question, where f of x equals to 4 over 5x. And again, we need to find this function's inverse. And no surprise, I follow the same 2 steps. So, step 1, I start from y equals to 4 over 5x. And I need to make x the subject. And for that, I need to get x away from this denominator. And the way to do that is to multiply both sides of this equation by x. Indeed, I multiply the right-hand side by x and the left-hand side by x, which leads us to y times x equals to 4 over 5. Now on the left-hand side, x is being multiplied by y, and so to get rid of that y, I divide both sides by y. And that leads us to x equals to 4 over 5y. And that's the first step done. I move on to step 2, and in step 2, I swap the x and the y, leading us to y equals to 4 over 5x, and finally I define the inverse function as inverse f of x equals to 4 over 5x. And that's the answer. Finally, I look at the fourth function we have here, which is f of x equals to 5 over 2x plus 6, and to find its inverse, I follow the same 2 steps again. So step 1, I start from y equals to 5 over 2x plus 6, and I need to rearrange this to make x the subject. To do that, the first thing I have to do is get x away from this denominator. And for that, I'm going to multiply both sides by the entire denominator, 2x plus 6. And so the left-hand side becomes y times 2x plus 6, which equals to 5. I now distribute the y across this pair of parentheses, which leads us to 2xy plus 6y equals to 5. Now I get rid of the 6y on the left-hand side by subtracting 6y from both sides. So this becomes 2xy equals to 5 minus 6y. Finally, since x is being multiplied by 2 and y, I divide both sides of this equation by 2y. And I'll just write that. I'm going to divide the left-hand side by 2y and the right-hand side as well. And that leads us to x equals to 5 minus 6y over 2y. And that's the first step done. We've made x the subject. Finally, I move on to step 2, in which I swap the x and the y, and I define the inverse function. So swapping x and y, we have y equals to 5 minus 6x over 2x, and now I can state that the inverse function is equal to 5 minus 6x over 2x. And that's the answer. And there we go. That's it for this video, in which I showed you 4 examples on how to find the inverse function.